CQ.
Hello and welcome back to CQ, the AWS Certification quiz show, where I'm here back with my regular Gerardo. Welcome back. Super excited for episode 4 of season 2 today because we are tackling the developer cert for the first time.
That's right. Thank you for having me back. It's awesome to be here.
It had to be you, right? How do you feel about developer?
Good. So the previous 2 I did were on Solution Architect Associate.
Yes.
This is the first time I am doing developer.
First time we are doing developer, as in the first ever episode focusing on this.
Very nice. So yeah, really happy. Let's see how it goes.
So tell us a bit about how 2020 is shaping up for you, seeing as everyone already knows who you are.
Please. The 2020, look, there are a lot of big things that I'm working on. I've seen customers in my initial years at AWS, a lot of customers were moving workloads to AWS, and they still do. But I'm sensing a theme these days of how customers are trying to leverage more the power of their data and getting into things like data warehousing and analytics and building data lakes and experimenting with machine learning. So I've sensed there's a change on the things that customers are talking to me about. And it's exciting because it gives me an opportunity to learn about new things.
Awesome, I love it. And does that follow on to your role at Sydney Summit this year?
Yeah, so this year at Sydney Summit, I am part of the people that are leading the build track, and the build track is actually a track for developers. So we have 11 sessions across multiple parts of the domains of developing on AWS, and we're preparing an amazing event. We spend a lot of time preparing these sessions to make sure that the messaging is right, that the stories are good, that what we're telling people is actually interesting. So if you happen to be in Sydney on the 1st and 2nd of April, come along. It's going to be an amazing event.
I can't wait. And real quickly before we jump into our Dev Cert, where are we today? Your third choice today.
Oh, the backdrop. Yeah. So you're going to learn. I'm assuming not a lot of people will know this, but the tallest waterfall in the world is that one. And it's in Venezuela, the place where I come from. It's called the Angels Falls.
I love it.
In Venezuela, we know it as the Salto Ángel, which is not an Angel's Falls. But it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's I don't know. I love it. And it's funny because when there's rainy season, it's actually massive, and you see it like that, like it's a huge waterfall. But some of the times of the year, it's actually like, a little drip. But it's always there, awesome. And it's an amazing place in Venezuela.
Well, it's great to have you back. Welcome back. Let's jump into it. Our very first episode on the AWS Certified Developer Exam. So this is the show for you if you're looking for that cert. I know we've had a few call-outs for it. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Yeah? Let's do it. Question 1, efficiency.
Okay.
Gerardo, you have designed an application architecture that uses microservices to deploy small, independent components. Mm-hmm. These components will need to quickly scale based upon application usage. How would you deploy these microservices to ensure process isolation with the least operational overhead?
Okay, this is an interesting one. So it's talking about 2 different things. It's talking about ensuring process isolation, and it's also talking about making it easy, so the least operational overhead once the services are online. So with answer 1, use an Amazon EC2 micro instances with auto scaling.
Well, it sounds like that would work.
It would work, definitely. But it's probably going to be a lot of work.
Okay.
There's a lot of operational overhead. So when you're deploying microservices, you're likely to be deploying tens, hundreds, or maybe thousands of it. And if you need to manage how these things are deployed, how to orchestrate the placement of in which instances some of these containers are going to be, if you're going to manage capacity, there's a lot of things that you shouldn't need to worry about because you're working on building your microservice, you want to ship it, and you don't want to worry about all this of this operational overhead, then that's not the best answer, especially because our question is asking us for least operational overhead. The second one is deploy tasks to AWS Fargate with service auto-scaling. That sounds like it. AWS Fargate, for those that are not familiar with it, it is the easiest way to run containers on AWS. So Fargate abstracts almost all the complexity on the infrastructure side of things. You don't need to worry about the orchestration software. You don't need to worry about the placement of the containers. You don't need to worry about scaling. All of those things are taken care on your behalf. And it's definitely a service that ensures process isolation. Given that we're abstracting all these things from you, the developer, we make sure that they are secure and isolated. And what you need to worry about is about configuring your tasks correctly and deploying those tasks. We worry about isolating those tasks for you.
So how does that isolation work on Fargate, Gerardo?
Okay, so I don't know a lot about this, but I know some of it. So in Fargate, we isolate using VMs, the traditional virtual machines. We may use a different software for it. We, for example, launched a Firecracker. We open sourced it recently, and it's the way how we go about configuring these micro VMs. And the constructs there are very similar to what you use to isolate VMs. So you have kernels, you have operating system constructs. You isolate networks in the same way that you do with VMs. So in Fargate, each application sits on its own VM or in its own micro VM, and that means that each application is isolated from each other, and even if you have multiple applications running under the same on the same Fargate account.
Okay.
And just to add, within that VM, or each of those VM has access to their own kernel, their own network interface, their own data storage, and their own credentials. So it's actually pretty isolated and probably the best way.
It sounded like a good answer, but let's check the input.
Yeah, so launching containers using AWS Lambda layers, that's not a thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we got a bit distracted there.
Lambda layers is a thing, and it's about embedding this or embedding all the software and all the libraries and everything that your Lambda function needs to operate. You can actually establish that as part of the layer, and that gives you a nicer way of configuring this and repeating the same configuration and ensuring consistency every time that you launch a particular Lambda function. But containers in Lambda is not a thing. It happens that under the hood of Lambda, there's actually containers. And under the hood of containers, there's VM, and under the hoods of VMs, there's a data center. Surprise, surprise. So the cloud is not actually in the cloud. But launching container constructs on Lambda layers or on Lambda is not a thing.
Got it.
And finally, using AWS Elastic Beanstalk with predefined AMIs. No, that looks like a lot of work. You would have to have...
You look tired just reading that answer.
You have to have too many of those, and usage is not going to be managed. It's not going to be an efficient way of doing it. So yeah, I'm going to go with answer number 2.
Locking in number 2. 75% viewers agreeing with you so far. Let's check it out. Of course,
awesome.
It's number 2. I don't think you would dare get question 1 wrong.
Awesome.
Right?
Awesome. Can I say something before we go to the next question?
Okay, let me move back
It's
for you.
MJ's birthday.
You cheeky.
We should be happy birthday.
Stop.
We're not going to do
we're
it.
not going to do that. We're going to jump straight to question number 2. Thanks for that,
But
buddy.
it is.
Databases. Concentrate.
Okay.
Gerardo, a library runs a third-party app that stores book borrowing information in DynamoDB.
Yeah.
You have been asked to write a microservice that will notify people when a book that they reserved has been returned to the library.
Yeah.
Following? Are you
Yeah, I'm
concentrating?
following. Yeah.
However, you are not able to modify the third-party app.
Mm-hmm.
How could this microservice be triggered when a book is returned? I like this one.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you can't modify the third-party app, and you want to build a microservice that will notify people when a book they reserved has been returned to the library.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Bob. Continue.
Okay, that's interesting. So, so let's go through the answers.
There's a lot of words in this question, so it's often quite important to really pull out the key
Correct.
keywords, okay?
So you want to, what we want to do, and I'm understanding with the question is, how do you trigger this microservice that's going to be separate from that third-party application
Yes.
in order to track when books are returned? Okay.
Let's have a look.
Add a DynamoDB user-defined function that triggers on a book return. It's not a thing.
It doesn't exist in DDB, right?
Correct. So DynamoDB doesn't have the ability to write functions for it. You probably use Lambda or in Lambda functions to do things, but it's not a DynamoDB construct. Schedule an AWS Lambda task to check the database every hour.
Okay.
No. So there's you can definitely
Because they want an immediate trigger, right? Not just every hour.
I'm assuming when you use the word trigger, it's probably you want one effect to cause another. If you have to wait an hour or run a Lambda on a schedule, that you're not having that. So I'm assuming that, I mean, it could work, but I don't think that it's the right way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what would you do in this Lambda function? Are you going to scan the whole DynamoDB database to see what changed? There's a lot of complexity in this one.
So we're getting rid of 1 and 2 straight up.
I think so. I might come back to them if I don't have found anything better. Okay. Use DynamoDB streams to trigger an AWS Lambda function. That has to be it. So DynamoDB
you were getting worried
streams. Yeah. I thought about it when I was reading the question. So DynamoDB streams is this construct by which you get a stream, or you get a trail of every single change that happens on a DynamoDB table. So you can enable DynamoDB streams to have different applications or different microservices consume these changes that occur in DynamoDB. And there are multiple applications. It could be for analytics, for example. If you want to analyze what things are changing within your data, you can have an analytics application pull from the stream that information so that you don't have to query the entire database to figure out what's changed. So it's a nice way of doing it. And what I'm thinking is this is a perfect example of if someone has returned the book, then that third-party app is going to change an item, or it's going to modify an attribute within an item of that DynamoDB table. The easiest way you can get that information out is using a DynamoDB trigger, DynamoDB streams trigger a Lambda function. So to
paraphrase, it adds functionality without modifying the original app.
Correct. It's gonna trigger an event on the back of something changing in DynamoDB, in your DynamoDB table.
So we like number 3.
We like
People
it a
on
lot.
the polls are liking number 3. Just remember, type in the corresponding number of what you think the answer is, and you can follow us along with Gerardo's explanations. So check out number 4.
And number 4 says you use a AWS CloudTrail to trigger an AWS Lambda function when the DynamoDB log file contains a book return. Wow. Okay. So AWS CloudTrail is a history of every single API call that you make against AWS on any service. So even if you run the console, and those actions translate to APIs, if you are interacting with the cloud with an SDK or with the CLI, all those things are record. And it's for compliance purposes. If you want to go back, if there's something bad happens and you want to know what caused it, you can go back to CloudTrail. Now, there's an option where you can actually send your trails in CloudTrail to CloudWatch logs, which is a service that allows you to analyze logs. And you can in turn create metrics so that if there's things or some patterns that you want to be alerted on CloudWatch logs, you can get an alert. And then with that alert, you can put it in a Lambda function to do something. But you can see how this is pretty complicated when there is a nature. So in theory, it could work. You're going to have to wire a lot of things together. You're going to have to write some logic. And it's not probably the easiest way to do it. So my option would be number 3, DynamoDB streams to trigger an AWS Lambda function.
Locking it in?
Yes.
Locked it in on the polls, and of course it is number 3. You got that. All right, let's jump to question number 3. Are you ready for a bit of code deploy?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right, you have a code deploy deployment group with 10 healthy instances. Oh, a bit of maths coming up, I reckon. A new deployment is started with minimum healthy hosts set to 9.
Okay.
However, the first instance fails to deploy. What will code deploy do to the deployment? Oh, that was a lot of deploys. Did you get it?
Yeah, because deploying is for deploying. Anyway, so AWS Code Deploy is a great service, and what it does is basically automates the deployment. There's a lot of complexity in deploying. You want to make sure that the environment is ready to be deployed. After you deploy, you want to make sure that it actually worked and you didn't break it.
Don't say deploy again.
It helps you put your application on the underlying infrastructure.
Beautiful.
So there are multiple complexities. So the service helps automate all of those deployment steps. It measures the application health check to make sure the deployment was successful, and it can do that gradually for you, so you can minimize downtime and ensure more consistency in your deployment. So it's a great service if you're still using the old ways of deploying, which is manually. Not great.
Okay, so we got a split on the polls between 1, 2, and 4.
Okay.
All over the place with this question.
That's good. It means it's a good question. All right, so how would code deploy treat the deployment? Now, minimum healthy hosts is an attribute or a configuration attribute that you can configure on rolling updates for code deploy. Code deploy allows you to do 2 different types of deployments. Rolling updates, meaning the existing deployment group, your application starts deploying in those, and it could do it 1 instance at a time, or it could do it half of the instances at a time, or it can do the entire thing at a time in one big bang. But there's another type, which is blue-green deployments. Now, with blue-green deployments, you don't have this configuration metric. You only have it for rolling deployments. And what it means is you want to make sure that there's always a minimum number of instances delivering the application to your users. So you want to ensure there's a certain quality or performance that your users expect. And that's why you set a minimum healthy host figure.
Now we've got all answers coming up. We're split across the board.
This is awesome. This is awesome. So let's look at the first one. It will continue the deployment one instance at a time. Let's park that for a second. The second is it will immediately fade the overall deployment. The third one is it will launch a replacement instance and attempt redeployment. And the fourth one is it will reboot the failed instance and attempt redeployment. And it's interesting because there's a game with numbers here. Because you have a deployment group that consists of 10 instances, and you're telling code deploy, we always need to have 9 instances available delivering traffic, then you only have 1 instance to deploy. So by default, code deploy is going to try to deploy to 1. If it's successful, then it deploys to the second. If it's successful,
but
goes
if
to the
one
third,
fails, you'd only have 8, so that's not going to be
correct. So if one of the instances fail, now you only have 9 instances to deploy. And because you need to have 9 instances available all the time, then code deploy is not going to deploy.
That should help us with these options.
So the first one says it would continue. No, it won't continue.
No, you don't.
Number 2, it will fail the overall deployment. I think that's probably it. Number 9, it would launch a replacement instance.
Code deploy doesn't launch.
It's not going to automatically increase your deployment group.
Or reboot, which we've got in number 4.
Yeah, it's not going to do that for you. So it's definitely going to be number 2. But there's something funny. If the failure occurs on the 10th instance, it's going to be successful because you've already deployed to 9
healthy.
And that's the minimum that you need.
I love it. Okay, where did we get to? Most people went for number 1, actually. So we proved that's not going to happen because that would have equaled 8.
There you go.
We were right. Number 2, it is. Good question. Awesome. Can we have more like those, please, Producer John? I quite enjoyed that. Let's move on to question number 4.
Okay.
Performance. Here we go. All right, Gerardo, you have written a web application in AWS Elastic Beanstalk that removes backgrounds from selfie pictures. You do that quite
regularly. Exactly. That's what I do.
Users have complained that the website is slow. So you wish to move to an asynchronous model to process pictures. How can you do this using AWS Elastic Beanstalk?
This is a great question. And the question is being...
Such a modern question.
No, and it's the question is actually being generous with us. Because it's saying...
Hold on. Are we ready for tip of the week? Are you about to give us a tip?
No.
No? Okay, we're not ready for tip of the week.
Not yet.
Continue.
In a second. So it's being generous because it's telling us the website is slow, so we have a performance issue, but it's also giving us the solution somewhat. It's telling us you want to move to an asynchronous model. And an asynchronous model is one way of dealing with those performance issues, because you can now queue the things that you need to do. We can call it tasks. In this case, removing the background from a selfie picture, you queue those in some way. And then you have a sort of a server or some code running somewhere that it starts processing those asynchronously. So taking one by one, finish it, then grab the other one.
So as soon as you said a word there, our poll changed. Do you know
Yes.
what the word was that you said?
Did I say worker?
No, you said queue.
Queue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds
And
a
our
lot like
poll suddenly changed.
it sounds a lot like queuing. So before I read the answers, there are multiple environment types that you can deploy in CodeDeploy. There's at least 3. One is a web application with an auto-scaling group that scales automatically.
Okay.
The second one is web application as well, where you have a load balancer and a single instance. And this is something that you probably use just for testing before you actually transition it into a one that is auto-scaling. But there is a special one that is way different to those two, which is a worker type environment.
That's why you thought you said worker.
Correct. So in the worker type environment doesn't have a load balancer. It simply puts all these tags into a queue, an SQS queue, and then it can auto-scale workers to start consuming that queue.
So that sounds...
And it's a lot more scalable. So if you have a performance issue on a system that doesn't need to be synchronous, a system that you can allow a couple of minutes for things to process, when you have a worker type environment, you can scale massively the worker instances. You can have any number you want, dozens of those, consuming the pool if the pool is big enough.
Okay.
So it allows you to process in parallel a lot of those tasks. So having said that, let's read the questions.
That'd be great.
So activate long polling on the web request while awaiting results. Activate load polling on the web request. That doesn't sound like a thing. Although you could obviously install your own queuing mechanism on the servers, but that's a lot of work.
Okay.
And it's also probably not going to solve the problem because we're talking about a performance issue. Those web servers are probably already using most of the resource, most of the CPU processing a couple of those pictures.
Yep.
And they don't have the capacity to do more. So the way to go about it is actually getting more of those instances. So that one I don't like. Spawn a local background worker process to process the pictures. Same issue as before. So a local worker would be working on the instance itself, and it's an instance that is already delivering poor performance.
Okay.
So probably not a way to go about it. Create a working environment utilizing an Amazon SQS.
All the words.
Exactly, all the words of that particular Elastic Beanstalk environment type.
Yep.
And finally, configure a periodic task to queue messages on a schedule. Yeah, nah.
That's your answer? Yeah, nah.
Yeah, nah.
Okay.
Doesn't make a lot of sense.
Very articulate. Thank you for that, Arado.
It's an Australian thing. Yeah, nah. Yeah, nah.
Thanks for that. So you're going for number 3. Is that where we got to? Yes.
I'm gonna go with number
Worker
3.
environment. Most people agreed with you on the poll, and of course it is
Awesome.
number 3.
Awesome. Tip of the week.
Oh, you want to do tip now?
Yes, tip
okay,
of
why
the
don't I
week.
just let you run the whole thing, huh?
Okay, can I press the button?
Yeah, press the button. How long have you been wanting to do that in your 3 episodes?
I think I did it last time. Yeah.
All right, shoot. Tip of the week. Oh, I think you did, actually, yeah.
So look, some of these questions in the certification exam are pretty wordy. They could be 1 or 2 paragraphs, and sometimes you can't see where the question is going. So one strategy,
Sometimes I can't read them properly.
One strategy that has worked for me in order to be more effective with the time is to actually skip the first part of the question and read the question that is asking you. So if you notice, there's a paragraph giving you a scenario, giving you a description of something, and right after that, there's almost always the question. And that question is going to have the key parts to it. They may be asking for improving performance. Then you need to think about improving performance when you read that paragraph. It could be asking about cost effectiveness. It could be asking about least operational overhead. So that's going to give you a huge tip into what this question is about. And then when you read the context and that question from the top, then you can actually, in a much faster way, know where the thing is going. So it's a tip on getting a bit of clarity, and it's about on using your time more effectively, because sometimes in those exams, especially if you're going into the professional level or the specialty level exams, time is a bit short. You're expected to be on your toes and respond to questions quickly. Or faster?
Quicklier.
I love it. More quickly.
Well, this man would know, seeing as you were the first person in ANZ to achieve all the certs.
Yeah, I'm a certification nerd.
You are indeed. I remember you ran round to my desk and announced it to me when you got that last newest one.
Of course, I was excited.
All right, I think we've got time for one more question today, everyone. So let's jump into question number 5.
Let's do it.
Okay, alrighto. We gotta zip through this one. Your web application is deployed by Amazon ECS containers, fronted by a load balancer. You wish to move to a new application version by using blue-green deployment. The blue version is live, and the green version was deployed on a different port for application testing. Jumping straight to the last question, as per your tip, how can you now gradually swap the application to the green version?
This is a great question.
It's so good.
This is a great question.
We might go over time.
So as I said in the previous tip, so they're asking us to gradually swap the application to a newer version, and that's something you have multiple options in ECS to do that. And let's recap some of those. So in Amazon ECS, by default, when you deploy a new version of your service, it's going to do rolling updates of your service, right? So it's going to do in-place deployment. So the tasks running on the instances that you already have are going to start swapping to the new version of your application. And that could be good or could be bad. It's a simple way of doing it, but if you want to ensure that your deployments are actually successful before you point any traffic to it, any real-world traffic to it, it's probably not the best way of doing it. And that's why you can do things like blue-green deployments.
Okay.
With blue-green deployments, and for those that are not familiar with it, it's this principle of spinning up another environment with all the infrastructure that it needs, deploying your application there, and testing it before you point any traffic to it. So it's one environment is blue, another environment is green, and there's no order here. One can be green, another will be blue. It's just two words to explain that there are two different environments. And this is massive, because it means you can now deploy your application, test it, get some confidence that it works, and then you can start maybe with one switch, moving all the traffic to the newer environment, or you can gradually do it. You can simply send, let's say, 5% of the traffic to this new environment, and throw some production traffic to it and see and measure customer satisfaction, or you can measure the speed of your application. And if everything is well, you can start gradually moving all to that environment. And this is something awesome. This is a deployment pattern that is very common in the cloud, because when we used to work with in data centers, it's very hard to get a separate piece of infrastructure deployed just for testing for a couple of minutes, right, or for a couple of hours. We don't normally have that sort of capacity in data centers. In the cloud, it doesn't matter. Who cares, right? You can replicate that. You test it, and then you tear the second one off. So it's a really good deployment pattern.
Okay.
Having said that, in ECS, you can do that in multiple ways.
Yes.
So let's read some of those answers. Use weighted target groups on the load balancer. That sounds really good.
Yeah.
And this is a feature we launched late last year.
Reinvent.
Yeah, maybe Reinvent, maybe before. Yeah, I don't know. Do you know?
I thought Reinvent.
Okay, yeah,
let's
maybe.
go with that.
No, let's go with Reinvent. Where basically it allows you to add some weight to certain target groups so that you can shift traffic between those target groups. Now, it is very important that you configure those properly, and it allows you to shift traffic gradually. You can have 5% of the traffic to one environment, and you can start moving that over time as you get more confidence that your new deployment is successful. So that looks like
pretty much exactly what you described in the first place.
Let's read the second one. Swap the listener rules for the existing target group.
Yep.
Now, that would work as well. And this is the way we used to recommend it to customers before we launched this weighted target groups load balancer.
Yeah, a few people gone for this one.
Correct.
Well. Yep.
You could simply swap the listener on that target group, but the problem with this is not going to be gradual. It's going to be one massive. So you stop sending traffic to one environment and you start sending 100% to the other one. That's also a blue-green deployment, but it's not gradual like the question is asking for.
Okay.
Trigger an ECS rolling update. This is the normal way ECS deploys updates to your application, but it's definitely no blue-green, which is what the question is asking us for.
Cool.
Enforce a new deployment of the EC2 cluster. That's some strange word in there, but probably referring to the same.
Let's call it distractor.
Probably referring to the same default way. So
I assume you're going with number one.
I'm going to go with number one.
Let's wrap this up.
Awesome.
Number one it is. Gerardo, thank you so much for joining me again. No doubt you'll be back soon. And thanks for doing our very first developer cert. How exciting.
Happy to
Let us know what you thought, everyone. Let us know if you'd like another one on developer. We might get Gerardo back. We might get some of your buddies back.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll see you next week for episode 5, season 2 of CQ. Thank you.
Thank you. See you later.